数据的问题。谢谢。
Hello, I'm Dazza Greenwood. I run law.MIT.edu. And this talk is, I think, follows well from the talks that immediately preceded. I'd like to discuss computational law as something that expresses law and legal processes as standard data through interoperable interfaces, service interfaces on networks. So, looking back, law, like every other industry and profession, of course, is being transformed by the digital age. In the law, that looked very much like initially taking documents and providing them in digital form. So it looks something like this. You've got a document, and now it's digital. This, however, is not quite yet computational. It is digital, but it's a document paradigm. It's a paper paradigm, maybe with a sprinkle of metadata, okay, a nod toward the future, but not yet computational. In the current phase, we're seeing a step beyond that to more apps and services that are extending this concept of a direct linear extrapolation from manual processes and paper documents. In the next era, I think, which has already started to emerge, and expect to see more of an atomization of the information. By that I mean, imagine going from a big chunk of matter, composed of molecules which are composed of atoms, down to the granular data, which we can think of like the atomic level of information. What we need to see is this information existing as standard data expressed through interoperable interfaces that can provide services such as updates and alerts that are event-based and that can be linked or integrated to external systems, apps and services and platforms. Now we're getting more computational. China, I think, is a recognized leader in adoption and the embrace of automation in other sectors of the economy, of course in manufacture and in supply chain and value chain. We can begin, I think, to imagine, and in some cases in Silicon Valley, London and some other places, in Hong Kong there's some startups, and around the world, chains of applications and services that themselves are automated to create an overall legal process. So, just to break this down a little bit so it's more understandable, this is what data looks like. You can imagine data in a spreadsheet format or CSV, comma-separated values. On the left is JSON structure of data. On the right is XML, extensible markup language. Law, starting from a document format, is well tuned to being expressed in data through markup languages like this. By interfaces, I mean something like a REST HTTP interface that allows you to discover and integrate with data and services from a number of different sources through applications and services that can exist in a constellation of interoperable capabilities. Automation is the next step. So as we have more and more legal processes and instruments that exist as data and that can express themselves as a service, we can have listeners and triggers and start to have chains of activities that can automate more of the life cycle of a legal process. So what we want is legal content that's created and collected in standard formats and data structures that can be displayed as legal instruments or rules, which themselves can be understood as plain language, so a business person or a citizen could understand what the rules are. Lawyers can parse them, and it can be written in more of a complete legal expression, and also can be understood by machines. So on the left, we can see a kind of a representation of how one example of this looks. The Creative Commons copyright license is expressed in short, plain language format. It's expressed in a much longer intellectual property agreement, and it's expressed in a machine-readable format. On the right, we see another example of that from the Accord project for smart contracts that exist on blockchains. I'm talking about data, but something that doesn't go without saying is the provenance of the data and being able to verify the data. Version control systems, VCS, like that's provided through the Git protocol, for example, are best practices in other industries that depend upon data that we can also use in the legal industry. Here's an example of law that exists. The authoritative version exists in a Git repository. This is the Washington, D.C. city ordinances. And here's an example of somebody that recently found an error in the law and using the Git protocol made a pull request to correct the error, and it was merged directly into the authoritative repository. Every event that happens in a version control system using the Git protocol has a hash digest, and is part of a log that's completely verifiable with a timestamp. These are some of the attributes that we would need if we wanted to transform something that's so important as the law into a computational system. So computational law quintessentially ought to be about standard and verifiable data flowing through integrated applications, linked through interoperable services, and that allows connected global systems of legal content, instruments, and activities. How do we know if law is computational? Well, some things that we might look for would be, can we identify and summarize and visualize rules over time? Rules over time? Could we pose questions? So for example, can we indicate certain conditions about a situation and know what rules would apply and what the legal outcomes would be? Like through a simulation, for example, or other kind of model. And we trace and verify algorithmic or other computational processes. Could we be able to explain them and recreate them? Can we really, in other words, ensure accountability and due process? And can lawmakers, like in the DC legislature, have more opportunities to measure the performance of laws over time and perhaps be able to adapt them? And the answers are yes, these are examples of success metrics. So, in the bigger picture, in other industries that depend upon data and computation, there's a concept of a stack. The OSI seven-layer stack on the left is classic for a network. On the right is extrapolation of that to business networks from the late 90s when e-commerce was beginning. What would the stack be for the law? Architecturally, this would be another important way to standardize what's occurring in each layer from data to applications to networks, processes, software. So I understand that we're short on time, so I'm sort of whizzed through that, but if you'd like to learn more about this, I invite you to join me at law.MIT.edu. And our next computational law course, the 4th annual course, is starting in about a month, January 15, 16, and 17. It's available online and for free. And we can discuss some of these topics in more depth then and in an ongoing way. So, thank you for your attention.